Hello and welcome to the Westferry Times. I'm Emily Carter. Today we're really diving deep into something that affects all of us, the constantly shifting political landscape here in the UK. It really feels like the electoral map is, almost continuously being redrawn. We've seen the red wall go blue, the rise of other parties, and just this general sense that voters are, perhaps more volatile than ever. It's dynamic, and frankly, it's a really crucial conversation to have right now. To help us make sense of all this complex picture, we're really fortunate to have Professor Daniel Whitaker with us. Professor Whitaker is a highly respected political scientist and election specialist at the London School of Economics. His expertise here is truly invaluable. Professor, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Emily. It's great to be here. A fascinating topic.
Absolutely. Okay, let's try and unpack this. A good starting point seems to be that pivotal 2019 general election. We saw some really major shifts then, didn't we? Traditional labor strongholds electing conservative MPs. What do you see as the sort of long-term significance of that election?
Well, 2019 was genuinely seismic, I think. And you're right, Brexit was a huge factor, a catalyst, certainly. But the shifts went deeper than just that. It really brought these underlying fault lines to the surface, things around identity, class, deeply held values. Think about places like Bolsover or Blythe Valley going conservative. That wasn't just a tactical blip or a simple protest. It signaled something more like a fundamental cultural realignment.
Yeah.
A feeling among certain voters that Labor's national narrative, its priorities, they just didn't connect anymore. Particularly thinking about the history of those areas, former industrial heartlands, and perceptions of which party really stood for them.
Right. And has that trend, that sort of earthquake, as you put it, has it just continued rolling on since then, or has something changed?
That's the interesting thing. The erosion of that traditional labor base, the red wall, it was definitely real, very significant. But more recently, we're seeing signs of, well, maybe voter remorse is too strong, but certainly a reevaluation, a reassessment. Issues like the cost of living crisis, which really hit hard post-COVID, combined with, frankly, periods of political instability, seem to have made some voters perhaps reconsider their 2019 choice. So it's not a straight line from 2019. It feels much more fluid now.
And that fluidity presumably creates openings for other parties. We hear a lot about the Liberal Democrats, the Greens. Are they managing to capitalize on this uncertainty?
Yes, that's definitely a key part of this evolving picture. The Lib Dems, for instance, they've been quietly regaining ground. Especially in the South, they seem to have moved beyond being just the Stop Brexit party. Now it's more about local issues, positioning themselves as the main alternative to the Conservatives in certain areas. It's quite a strategic repositioning, focusing on those traditional Tory seats where they sense an opportunity.
Okay, and what about the Greens?
The Greens have also, I think, matured quite significantly. They're less seen now as just a single-issue party, purely environmental. They're presenting a broader alternative, especially attracting younger urban voters, people really engaged with climate, yes, but also social justice issues. And their growing presence in local councils has definitely boosted their credibility, made them seem like a more viable option.
So neither is likely to form a government on their own, obviously, but could they genuinely hold the balance of power, influence who gets into number 10?
That's precisely the point. A majority for either seems, highly improbable in the current system. But their potential influence, that's growing. In a tight election where neither Labor nor the Conservatives get a clear majority, which, as we'll discuss, looks possible, these smaller parties could absolutely become the kingmakers, or queenmakers, as it were. Their votes in Parliament could be decisive, and their policy demands could really shape the next government's agenda.
Which leads us neatly into tactical voting. We hear so much more about it now, people using websites, polls. Is this voters being more pragmatic, or is it maybe a sign of frustration that they don't love any option?
It's a really interesting phenomenon, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'd say it's probably a bit of both. Voters are, on the one hand, definitely more informed, more strategic. They have access to polling data, to resources like tacticalvote.co.uk. They're actively trying to make their vote count, to maximize its impact in their specific constituency. That's the pragmatic side.
But the frustration element.
Well, yes. It also reflects a situation where people might be voting less for a party they enthusiastically support and more against a party or an outcome they really want to avoid. That represents quite a profound shift in voter psychology, I think. It's less about pure preference, more about strategic blocking.
So elections become more like chess games. Voters trying to anticipate the outcome.
Exactly. That's not a bad analogy. Voters are thinking more about the consequences of their vote in the bigger picture. And of course, this makes everything much harder to predict. For pollsters, for the parties themselves, those traditionally safe seats, places like Northeast Somerset, maybe Esher and Walton, they suddenly feel much less safe, much more in play because of these tactical calculations.
Let's switch focus to the Labour Party. Under Keir Starmer, there's been a very clear, deliberate move towards the political center ground. How effective has that strategy actually been?
Well, effective is probably the right word, even if perhaps it hasn't always generated huge amounts of grassroots excitement. By consciously distancing the party from the Corbyn era, from some of those more radical policies, Labor has certainly become more acceptable, more palatable to a wider range of voters. It's made them look like a more credible potential government in the eyes of many.
Yeah.
But it's a very delicate balancing act, isn't it?
How so?
Because while you're trying to win back those crucial swing voters, maybe in Middle England, you risk alienating some of your more progressive base, particularly younger voters, perhaps. They might see it as diluting core principles. So it's effective in making the party seem electable, but it comes with internal tensions.
And is there evidence that voters are, buying into this rebrand? Are those target voters responding?
The polling data suggests yes to a significant extent, particularly among swing voters and maybe more centrist professional types. They seem more willing to consider Labor now than perhaps they were in 2019. But the real acid test, of course, will be whether they can actually win back seats in those key battleground areas, places in the West Midlands and Yorkshire, regions they lost heavily last time. Reclaiming ground there is absolutely crucial if Labour hopes to form a majority government.
Okay, let's broaden out again and think about the different nations within the UK. How are the distinct politics of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland shaping the UK's overall political future?
Hugely influential. Scotland, in particular, remains a really significant and potentially quite volatile factor. The SNP, yes, they're facing some internal difficulties right now, maybe a dip in the polls compared to their peak, but underlying support for Scottish independence, it consistently polls above 40%. That fundamental question about Scotland's place in the Union hasn't gone away. It continues to exert pressure.
And Wales, what's the dynamic there?
In Wales, we've seen Plaid Cymru gaining some momentum. They tacked into a strong sense of Welsh cultural identity, distinct policy priorities for Wales. They aren't pushing for independence in quite the same immediate way as the SNP, but their growing influence definitely adds to that sense of regional differentiation within the UK.
And Northern Ireland has seen quite historic changes recently, too.
Absolutely. The fact that Sinn Féin is now the largest party in the Stormont Assembly and holds the most Westminster seats for Northern Ireland, that's a landmark shift. It reflects significant demographic changes, shifts in political allegiance within Northern Ireland itself. And inevitably, that changes how Northern Ireland engages with the rest of the UK and with Ireland.
So, taken together, could these regional dynamics actually lead to, further fragmentation of the UK down the line?
It's certainly a real possibility. You can't discount it. Electoral results within the devolved nations, political shifts there, they could easily fuel new demands for more autonomy or even, renewed calls for independence referendums, particularly in Scotland. It does suggest that the unity of the UK as it's currently constituted isn't necessarily set in stone for the next, say, 10 or 15 years.
Let's talk about demographics. Who is actually voting and how are different groups shaping the results? Which cohorts are most influential?
Well, the youth vote Gen Z, younger millennials, is numerically very significant now. And they are often highly politically aware, driven by issues like climate, housing costs, inequality. Your potential power is huge. The challenge, historically, has been turnout. Younger people are just less likely to consistently vote compared to older groups. Voters aged, say, 65 and over, they vote in much higher numbers, very reliably. So their preferences still tend to carry disproportionate weight in elections simply due to turnout.
So bridging that youth turnout gap is key.
It's a massive challenge and a huge opportunity for parties trying to mobilize them. If younger voters turned out at the same rate as older voters, it could fundamentally change electoral outcomes.
And what about overall turnout levels? Is there still a sense of voter fatigue, maybe cynicism affecting engagement?
Unfortunately, yes. There is a background level of low trust in politicians, in institutions generally, that can definitely depress turnout, lead to disengagement, people feeling like their vote doesn't matter or that the parties don't represent them. However, it's also true that a really high-stakes election, one focused on issues that feel genuinely critical to people, maybe the NHS is perceived to be in crisis, or immigration becomes highly polarizing, that can cut through the fatigue. It can galvanize people and lead to a turnout spike. So it's not a fixed picture.
The way we get our news, our political information has changed so much. How are digital platforms, social media shaping the political narrative now?
Oh, massively. It's hard to overstate the impact. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, they're becoming really key battlegrounds, especially for reaching those younger demographics we just talked about. We're seeing parties like Labor and the Lib Dems trying to be quite active, quite creative on these platforms. Maybe the conservatives have been a bit more traditional in their digital approach, but everyone has to engage now. But alongside that opportunity comes a really significant threat: misinformation.
Right, things like deep fakes, AI-generated content.
Exactly. Deepfakes, AI creating false narratives, coordinated bot networks,
Yeah.
amplifying certain messages, drowning out others. It's a huge challenge to the integrity of political discourse.
And can the rules, the regulations, actually keep up with how fast this technology is developing?
It's a real struggle, frankly. The UK's Online Safety Act is, a step. It attempts to address some of these harms, but enforcement is incredibly difficult. And these platforms operate globally, so international cooperation is vital, but often lacking. At the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to voters themselves needing to be more critical consumers of information, developing better media literacy skills. That's becoming essential.
Okay, let's look ahead. Thinking towards the next general election, whenever that might be, and perhaps beyond, what should we realistically expect? What are the possibilities?
I think the main expectation should be more volatility. It seems unlikely we'll return to predictable, stable two-party majorities anytime soon. A hung parliament at the next election feels like a very strong possibility. Labor might well emerge as the largest single party, but quite possibly short of an overall majority. In that scenario, some kind of arrangement with the Liberal Democrats, whether a formal coalition or a looser confidence and supply deal, seems quite conceivable. Another factor to watch is Reform UK, or whatever party occupies that space on the right. Even if they don't win many seats, they could draw enough votes away from the Conservatives in key marginals, especially maybe in the Midlands or parts of the North, to really influence the national result.
And the bigger picture,
Yeah.
looking further out.
I think the era of comfortable two-party dominance really does seem to be fading. The long-term trajectory for the UK might look more like, well, more like many other European countries, a multi-party system where coalitions or minority governments are the norm. Where politics is more regionally diverse, it might lead to a political landscape that feels perhaps a bit messier at times, maybe less decisive, but potentially also one that's actually more representative of the complex range of views across the country.
Professor Daniel Whitaker, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for helping us navigate this complex and shifting terrain. It's really clear that these electoral changes aren't just numbers. They reflect much deeper things, cultural shifts, social anxieties, that whole evolving relationship between people and the state.
It's been my pleasure, Emily. A really important conversation to have.
And thank you all so much for tuning in to the Westferry Times. If you found this deep dive useful, please do consider subscribing and maybe share your own thoughts with us on social media. We'd love to hear from you. Until our next deep dive, please do stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. Thank you for watching Westferry Times.